I'm Elizabeth Gorayeb. I'm the Executive Director of the Wildenstein Plattner Institute, and on behalf of my colleagues here in New York, I welcome you here today. If my colleagues could just raise their hands so that I can identify and thank them properly. They're around. So I would like to welcome you all to our organization's first New York-based symposium, Digitization and the State of the Art World. We're grateful to the SAP Plattner Institute and the professional advisors of the international art market for their support of this event, and to SAP and Anne Rosenberg, who you just heard from, for hosting us in this truly spectacular venue. And I was saying to one of my colleagues this morning, if for some reason you start to zone out at what we're all saying today, not that you will, you can always look out the window because it's really gorgeous. So today's program brings together a variety of professionals, from catalog raisonné researchers, museum registrars and art librarians, to tech developers and data scientists, who are all focused on methods of describing, classifying, capturing, storing, and propagating information on works of art. Art data collection may be the catch-all classification to describe this pursuit. Or at least it's an attempt on my part to describe why this particular assortment of people are all at the same conference together. The fact of the matter is there's a cultural divide between the art world and the tech world. And this is a divide that is becoming increasingly necessary to bridge. The aim of our meeting is to explore some of the key issues that arise and the disruptions that can occur when we consider the varying and opposing perspectives of those involved in art data management. During this conference, we'll be proposing some best practice approaches and about improving the accuracy and accessibility of art-related data. And I hope we can also establish some pathways for moving forward towards these common goals. As the speakers on our rosters today will be addressing issues that are all at the heart of what we do with the Wildenstein Plattner, I thank them for agreeing to participate in our somewhat self-serving endeavor, because this really is about our mission at the WPI. As many of you already know, the WPI is a nonprofit foundation. We are a private foundation dedicating to preserving and sharing art historical information through the publication of digital catalogs, raisonnés, and digitized archives. We receive our funding from the SAP Plattner Foundation in Potsdam and from the Wildenstein family in New York, who gifted the WPI the rights to the Wildenstein Institute's historical archive and the intellectual property of many of the catalogs, or all of the catalogs, raisonnés, I should say, produced under its imprint. The historic Wildenstein Institute had an impressive track record, as I'm sure you know, of producing exemplary catalogs raisonnés, including ones for Monet, Manet, Gauguin, and I think some 40 others over its history. The WPI was founded in 2016 as an entirely new organization to forge ahead with this scholarly pursuit. But our approach would be geared towards the needs of the 21st century users of art-specific information. When I began as director, we didn't have a tech team in place, which is kind of interesting considering we're all here today. But what we did have was a huge, uninventoried treasure trove of paper archives and sale catalogs, as well as a legacy staff in Paris who were all hard at work on the multiple catalogs raisonné projects. Upon my first meeting with the French team, I found that many of these catalogs raisonnés were being written on Microsoft Word. I also learned, in the cases of the older projects, information was being kept on photo index cards maintained in loose paper files. A few of the projects, though, were dutifully being logged into a bespoke cataloging system. But this was not the good news I initially thought it was. This was a relational database that had been jerry-rigged from a pre-existing collection management system. And the data it kept was being backed up on giant physical servers in New York. All the work is being done in Paris, mind you. And it was maintained by a single off-site IT specialist. In terms of what we could do with this database, the system had broadly designated fields to capture free-form texts of all varieties. Information was added inconsistently for each object description, and specialized numeric codes were used as stand-ins for bibliographical citations. The greatest problem was that the system was constantly being reformatted to accommodate the requirements of individual users, depending on their projects. This resulted in a data structure so finicky that running and exporting meaningful reports was impossible. Even though the staff had been working on the same database, each project was essentially siloed, resulting in a lot of duplication, inaccuracy, and inefficiency. It was clear to me, as someone with little to no tech experience, that this would not work well for the new WPI. If the Wildenstein Plattner Institute wanted to produce high-quality catalogues raisonnés for the digital age, we needed a much more sophisticated tech platform. This is where the Plattner Brain Trust came into play, and soon HPI's Martin Lawrence came on board as the leader of our new tech effort, and you'll be hearing from Martin later today. As surprisingly antiquated and inefficient as this tech setup I just described might seem to someone in the tech sector, and those of you who are here from SAP today might be somewhat surprised, most of us in the art world are not that surprised. It's not unusual. Some of the most prestigious art institutions in the world struggle with the issues of data inconsistency, one-person IT support, retrofitted databases, and overly accommodating or short-sighted solutions that don't look towards the interconnectivity of multiple projects at other institutions. Perpetuating this individualistic approach will inevitably result in a massive headache for future art researchers. Just think of a scenario where doctors all decided to describe and diagnose diseases with their own idiosyncratic terminology and log their findings on a custom-made computer system that was exclusively suited to the needs of their individual private practices. This comparison might seem too extreme, but the parallels are worth considering. So, do we usher in the solutions that tech can provide and compromise our specialized methodologies for the greater good? And if so, what do we lose when we forego, say, logging information onto an index card and putting it in a file at our desk? That's a time-tested methodology that most art historians have trusted on, and for a large number of us, it continues to work. But just to give you a sense where my sympathies lie, I'll tell you a bit about my own experience. Prior to my tenure at the WPI, I worked for nearly 2 decades as a provenance researcher in the art market. I spent a lot of time combing through collection archives and reaching out to college librarians and museum registers, hoping they'd send me a scan of a hard-to-find sales catalog or exhibition catalog, and also making somewhat pleading deals with a registrar to tell me the secret name of a lender in a 1940s exhibition. This job often meant negotiating, and I said pleading, and sometimes having to pay the keepers of information and relying upon their goodwill in order to gain access to their valuable data. As some of these resources became available online, like Nodler, for example, that was pretty amazing, this work became easier. Still, I needed to know what to look for and where to look, to be cognizant of the limitations or omissions inherent in what I was finding, and to consider how I could piece all the information together to create a reliable and clear narrative. This pursuit is fundamental to the role of the art historian for time everlasting, and I don't think any of us here today disputes the fact that we will always need art researchers to make sense of art data. What I do ask you to consider is that some of our own approaches to art data management in the digital age might need to be overhauled. Should we forego keeping our own paper research files and log everything into a searchable database? In the age of the internet, shouldn't we all promote free exchange of information and oppose overly restrictive applications of copyright and intellectual property? How about scanning an entire archive and putting it online? Why don't we all use the same style guides and vocabularies for describing works of art? And why don't we link to one another's work, cite widely, and connect to foundational resources and the repositories of other institutions? It all seems like we would benefit from these more democratic processes. So for some of us, it's a no-brainer. Our first session today, which we're calling The Currency of Information, actually explores some of the conflicts in accepting this approach. We're acknowledging the value that the data we collect and we're acknowledging that the data we collect is valuable, and our incentive to share it is often connected to that value. As many of us in the art world know, we are as valuable as the information we keep. The professional compilation of this information as art advisors, curators, catalogue raisonnés authors, independent academics, and auction houses is fundamental to our professional livelihood. And given this common objective, we all stand to benefit from an efficient mode of data collection that reduces the redundancy of this effort and the propagation of error, excuse me. The technology that could make this a possibility exists, but as Caitlin Sweeney, this morning's sessions moderator, will be asking, what's the holdup? As we'll see, the challenges and opportunities that coexist in compiling and safeguarding data complicate the endeavor. We're hoping this morning's session will set the stage for the afternoon, when we'll turn our attention towards some of the case studies for possible solutions in practice and in development. After a lunch break, and I think we're going to break for lunch at around 12:30, and then starting again promptly at 2 p.m., we'll be taking a look at some of the applications and protocols currently in use to corral and standardize data, and how these efforts are being received by the key users of this information. David Newberry, who has traveled east from the Getty Research Institute, will be leading our second session participants in a discussion following their presentations. After that, at around 4 o'clock, we'll be having a 20-minute break. And then at 4:20, we'll hear from 3 data scientists who will address the identification mechanisms employed for works of art and for art-specific information. This final session will be introduced by Joanne Halpern, the director of the Hudson Plattner Institute here in New York. And the presentations will focus on the next generation of possible approaches to sharing, collecting, and identifying art-specific data through AI, unique identifiers, and crowdsourcing platforms like Wikipedia. Some of the questions that will be discussed are the identification schemes, what identification schemes exist to share artwork-related information, how accepted are these existing identifiers and who uses them, how would a system need to be designed to support a federated approach to the issues and management of identifiers, and what concepts or technologies are missing to increase the wide adaptation of identification schemes suitable for automatic information exchange. Now, these last questions, I should point out, were all posed by Martin Lawrence, my tech colleague at the WPI. I don't really understand necessarily what they all mean. They would never have occurred to me as an art world person, and as I'm sure Martin and his colleagues would attest, many of the questions that our provenance researchers ask would never have occurred to Martin or his tech team. Just an anecdote for you. 3 years ago, when we were setting up and Martin came on board, and we were trying to figure out how to best organize our colleagues in Paris and their catalogue raisonnés projects, Martin suggested that we set up a Trello board to track the progress of research for the Renoir catalogue raisonnés. You can just imagine the reception this got from our Paris team. But this is all to say that we have a lot to learn from each other, including how we query and seek information. And our task here is primarily to raise awareness about the types of questions that need to be asked and to consider the steps we can take collectively to improve the utility of art data collection. I hope we can make some progress in that direction. Now I'm going to turn the floor over to our Director of Digital Publications, Caitlin Sweeney, who will be introducing this morning's presenters. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day.